Beg, heiress, your life or your family's fortune. Miller's brutal gang holds Clara captive, terror gripping Clear Creek. Her arrogant world crumbles. Suddenly, a silent, grizzled mountain man, mocked as a savage dog, appears. His scarred hands move with terrifying precision, hinting at a deadly past. What happens next changes everything. In the burgeoning settlement of Aguas Claras, where the silver mines had spun a delicate web of prosperity, an invisible chasm separated the affluent elite from those who dwelled on its rugged fringes. Grand homes of polished wood and imported glass began to replace rough-hewn cabins, and the air, once thick with pine and wood smoke, now carried the lighter scents of fine perfumes and freshly brewed coffee. This town, vibrant and ambitious, considered itself a beacon of civilization in a wild land, its inhabitants keen to shed the untamed legacy of the frontier. Yet, even as Aguas Claras expanded, its boundaries were sharply drawn, not by fences, but by the unspoken rules of society. Atop this gilded hierarchy reigned Clara van der Hoven, an heiress whose striking beauty was rivaled only by the sharpness of her tongue and the glacial indifference in her eyes. She moved through the town with an air of unassailable privilege, her silk gowns rustling like the whispers of fortune. For Clara, the wilderness that pressed in on all sides was merely a backdrop, a raw canvas awaiting the transforming touch of wealth and refinement. In stark contrast, Elias belonged to the other side of that invisible line. His world was one of frost-bitten mornings, of tracking elk through snowdrifts taller than a man, of the raw, earthy scent of pine needles underfoot, and the biting wind that sculpted the peaks. He lived in a solitude so profound, it echoed in the vastness of the mountains themselves. Twice a month he would descend, a solitary sentinel emerging from the wilderness, his pack laden with fresh game, his worn furs redolent of wood smoke and crisp mountain air. He traded silent glances with the storekeeper, exchanging wild bounty for flour, coffee, and ammunition, his presence tolerated only for the exotic meat he provided. To the casual eye, he was a specter of a bygone era, a living monument to a simpler, harsher time that Aguas Claras was eager to leave behind. He was a whisper of the wild that the town preferred to ignore, an untamed element in their carefully constructed world. On a particular Sunday afternoon, under the deceptively benevolent gaze of a high mountain sun, fate, with its peculiar twist of malice, orchestrated a confrontation. Clara van der Hoven stood outside the general store, a vision of refined elegance in her silk gown and feathered hat, surrounded by an eager entourage of admirers. The idle chatter and polite laughter hung in the crisp air, until her eyes, sharp and dismissive, landed upon Elias as he emerged from the store. His frame, broad and solid, was clad in patched buckskins, his grizzled beard dusted with remnants of mountain frost, and his eyes, deep-set and ancient, held the quiet wisdom of countless solitary dawns. Clara, emboldened by her circle, felt a sudden, irresistible urge to assert her perceived superiority. Her voice, clear and cutting, sliced through the air as she began to mock him. She derided his unkempt appearance, the earthy scent that clung to his furs, and what she deemed his primitive ways. She referred to him as a mangy dog, a scruffy beggar at the gates of civilization, a creature best left to the wilderness from which he dared to intrude. A ripple of nervous, then emboldened, laughter spread among her companions, their mirth echoing Clara's cruel amusement. Elias, for his part, heard every word. The sting of her derision pierced him, not with the fire of anger, but with a profound, almost sorrowful pity for the young woman, who saw only a surface. He carried within him the silent testimony of countless battles, scars on his spirit deeper than any on his weathered skin, born of wars and struggles for survival that Clara, in her sheltered existence, could never begin to comprehend. His hands, calloused by axe and rifle, had once wielded other tools with a deadly grace that few living men could match. His mind, often quiet, held strategies forged in the crucible of frontier conflicts, making him a silent master of survival, a truth hidden beneath his unassuming facade. Yet he offered no retort, no challenge. He merely lowered his head, a silent acknowledgement of her words, allowing the wave of derision to wash over him. His pride swallowed deep, just as he had swallowed countless bitter truths from the unforgiving mountains. The laughter of the elite, sharp and triumphant, filled the town square, sealing the moment of her cruel dominance. But the mountains, patient and unyielding, watched, and as the echoes of their scorn faded into the vast silence of the surrounding peaks, a storm, far more menacing than any winter blizzard, was already gathering on the horizon. The delicate peace of Aguas Claras, built on silver and false pretense, was about to be shattered, and the man they had mocked, the mangy dog they had dismissed, would soon be the only bulwark against a terror that would strip away all pretense of civilization. Days later, a suffocating pall descended upon Aguas Claras, a quiet dread that began as a distant rumble and quickly swelled into a thunderous roar. It was the sound of hooves on parched earth, a rhythmic, unforgiving beat that heralded the arrival of Scar Miller's notorious gang. They were not mere outlaws, but a force of nature, known for their brutal efficiency and their chilling lack of mercy. Tales of their savagery had long drifted like smoke across the frontier, whispers of towns laid waste, fortunes plundered, and lives shattered. Now those whispers had taken on a terrifying reality. The gang, a formidable company of hardened men, moved with a predatory precision that bespoke of more than common banditry. They surrounded Aguas Claras with the chilling expertise of seasoned campaigners, cutting off every escape route, every line of communication. The vibrant, bustling settlement, so proud of its newfound civilization, was now a caged animal, helpless and isolated. The air, once filled with the mundane sounds of daily life, now vibrated with the guttural shouts of Miller's men, the whinny of horses, and the ominous click of rifle bolts. The town's sheriff, a man more accustomed to settling drunken brawls and impounding stray livestock, found his authority dissolve like morning mist before the rising sun. His deputies, stout but unprepared for such a storm, were quickly overwhelmed, their badges and meager weapons no match for the bandits' sheer numbers and ruthless intent. The illusion of safety, carefully constructed by years of prosperity, shattered into a million fragments. Panic, a cold and creeping tendril, began to grip the townspeople, freezing them in their tracks, their faces etched with disbelief and burgeoning terror. Clara van der Hoven, in her grand mansion that once felt like an impenetrable fortress, found her world collapsing around her. The thick walls, the ornate furnishings, the very symbols of her wealth and status, offered no protection against the raw, unbridled force that now consumed the town. She had believed herself untouchable, shielded by her family's name and fortune, by the very civility she championed. But these men knew no such reverence. They cared nothing for lineage or coin, only for plunder and dominance. The heavy oak doors that had always barred the world gave way under brute force, splintering inward with a sound that echoed the breaking of her own composure. Rough hands, smelling of stale sweat and gunpowder, seized her, pulling her from the sanctuary of her opulent parlor. Her fine silk dress, a testament to her station, was torn and soiled by the dusty floorboards, a stark symbol of her rapid descent from grace. She was dragged through the manicured gardens, past the startled faces of her servants, and out into the public square. The place where she had so recently dispensed her cruel judgment upon Elias was now a theater of her own humiliation and despair. The townspeople, her admirers and her subjects, stood transfixed, their faces pale with fear, their eyes wide with impotent horror. No one dared to intervene, to challenge the marauders who held their lives, and the life of their most prominent citizen, in their merciless grip. The bandit leader, Scar Miller himself, a man whose face was a roadmap of past violence, his single eye glinting with malicious glee, held her up before the terrified populace. He threatened her life, loudly, publicly, demanding the full surrender of her family's considerable fortune, using her as a pawn in his brutal game. The air was thick with the scent of fear and the promise of impending bloodshed. Clara's heart, a moment ago so full of pride and arrogance, now pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her breath hitched in her throat, tears stinging her eyes not from the dust, but from the raw terror that had replaced her polished indifference. She looked around at the faces of the townsfolk, seeing only their paralysis, their inability to help. The elegant world she had cultivated had evaporated, leaving her exposed and utterly vulnerable. Her gaze swept across the familiar square, now alien under the shadow of Miller's cruelty, searching, perhaps, for a shred of hope, a sign of defiance. And then, at the very edge of the square, where the shadows lengthened and the unkempt wilderness began its slow crawl towards the town's domesticated edges, a figure stood, unmoving, silent, a silhouette against the darkening sky, watching with eyes that held no surprise, no fear, only an ancient quiet understanding of the violence that unfolded. It was Elias, the mountain man, the mangy dog she had so readily dismissed. And in that moment, as her life hung by a thread and her world crumbled around her, Clara van der Hoven knew with a sudden chilling certainty that the rules of her polished society had ceased to exist. She was no longer a revered heiress, but merely another creature at the mercy of the wild, and the true nature of power, raw and elemental, was about to be revealed. The air in Aguas Claras became thick with a tension that was almost palpable, a suffocating blanket woven from fear and the raw scent of gunpowder. Scar Miller's voice, a gravelly rasp, echoed across the square as he continued to parade Clara, a trophy of his dominance. The townspeople, trapped in a tableau of terror, watched, unable to move, unable to breathe. It was a tableau that mocked the very idea of civilization, reducing human beings to trembling figures at the whim of brutes. Then, a subtle shift occurred. It was not a grand entrance, no thundering hooves or battle cry. Rather, it was a displacement of air, a softening of shadows at the periphery of the chaos. Elias, the man of the mountains, did not burst forth from the general store or storm in from the edge of town. He simply was there, materializing as if woven from the fabric of the encroaching dusk itself. One moment, his presence was merely a lingering impression in the minds of the townspeople, a fleeting thought of the ridiculed outsider. The next, he stood, silent and unyielding, at the edge of the square, an uninvited guest to this brutal spectacle. His movements were not rushed, but deliberate, each step a testament to a patience forged in solitary treks through unforgiving terrain. His buckskins, faded and worn, blended almost seamlessly with the dimming light, making him appear less a man and more a spirit of the wild come to claim its due. His gaze, unblinking, swept over the scene, assessing the numbers, the positions, the weaknesses. There was no visible emotion on his craggy face, only a profound, almost primal focus. The townspeople, their eyes drawn to him like moths to a flame, saw not a savior, but a ghost, a silent judgment on their collective inaction. Miller's men, initially too engrossed in their triumph to notice the shift, continued their raucous celebration, oblivious to the wolf that had just entered their unsuspecting flock. Clara, however, saw him, her eyes wide with unshed tears and terror fixed on his silhouette. She remembered her cutting words. The derision, the casual cruelty. Shame, hot and bitter, washed over her, an unwelcome companion to her fear. Yet, in his silent defiance, in the unyielding strength of his posture, she also saw something else. A sliver of hope, tenuous and fragile, born from the most unexpected of sources. Her elegant world had collapsed, and only the man she had scorned stood at its ruins, a solitary figure against the encroaching darkness. The change in the atmosphere was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. The bandits, slowly, began to feel it. A flicker of unease, a prickling sensation at the back of their necks. They were men of violence honed in the grim art of intimidation, yet something about the mountain man's silent scrutiny, his almost spectral presence, unsettled them. It was not the challenge of a rival gang, but the unnerving stillness of a predator. Miller, sharp-witted despite his brutality, was the first to sense the shift. His single eye narrowed, scanning the shadows, until it landed on Elias. He sneered, a flash of contempt crossing his scarred face. What could this ragged old man do? But Elias moved with a swiftness that belied his age and deliberate pace. His first target was a sentry, positioned carelessly near the edge of the square. A whisper of motion, a barely audible rustle of buckskin, and the man was gone, dragged into the deeper shadows. His rifle clattering softly to the ground, a sound swallowed by the general chaos. No shout, no struggle, just an abrupt, chilling silence where a man had been. Another bandit, turning to investigate the strange quiet, found himself face to face with the unyielding gaze of Elias. The man reached for his pistol, but the mountain man was quicker. A blur of movement, a guttural gasp, and the bandit crumpled, a silent heap, his weapon unfired. The true nature of Elias began to reveal itself. Where others saw a grizzled old hunter, the bandits in their dying moments recognized too late the tactical precision, the deadly efficiency of a veteran. His calloused hands, accustomed to the axe and the rifle, were now instruments of lethal grace, each movement economical, perfectly executed. He did not fight with brute force, but with the honed instincts of a predator who knew every trick of the wild, every weakness in his prey. He was not a man engaging in a brawl. He was a silent storm, a force of nature unleashed. The townspeople watched, their fear slowly mingling with a dawning awe, as the bandits began to fall one by one, not with the deafening roar of a gunfight, but with a terrifying, almost supernatural silence. The mangy dog was revealing himself to be the wolf, the protector of the helpless flock. The sounds of struggle were muted, almost discreet, swallowed by the sheer terror that paralyzed the onlookers. Each bandit who confronted Elias met the same swift, decisive fate. The air began to cool as the sun dipped lower, and a strange quietude settled over the square, punctuated only by the ragged breaths of the survivors. Miller, finally understanding the true threat, roared orders, but his men, bewildered and terrified by the silent, relentless assault, hesitated, their confidence eroding with each fallen comrade. The man who had been called a beggar, a stain, was now the only force standing between the town and utter annihilation. As the last rays of sun cast long, eerie shadows across the square, a final, chilling realization dawned upon Clara. This was not a rescue, it was a reckoning. The man she had so casually dismissed was, in this moment, the arbiter of life and death, the very essence of the wild justice she had disdained. And in the depths of her fear, a question began to form, cold and stark. Would this silent protector, this force of untamed nature, demand a price from her, just as the mountains demanded their due from all who dared to venture into their unforgiving heart? The answer remained unspoken, hanging heavy in the air, as Elias, unyielding and focused, moved towards Scar Miller, the true architect of this terror, his silent approach a promise of inevitable judgment. The square of Aguas Claras had become a battleground, not of clashing swords and thunderous gunfire, but of swift, precise movements and guttural, dying gasps. Elias moved like a wraith, a silent hunter in his element. He did not engage in flamboyant displays of strength, but in calculated, deadly maneuvers, each action designed to incapacitate, to neutralize. The bandits, accustomed to terrorizing easy targets, were now bewildered, their numbers dwindling with terrifying speed. They were outmaneuvered, outsmarted, confronted by a force that moved with the ancient rhythm of the wild. Scar Miller, his face contorted in a mask of fury and growing desperation, saw his empire of fear crumbling before his single venomous eye. His men, once so confident, were now scattered, some fleeing into the deepening shadows, others falling where they stood, silent victims of Elias's deadly ballet. The mountain man moved through them, not as a brawler, but as a seasoned warrior, a master of close-quarters combat, a ghost of the frontier forces that had once tamed the wildest territories. His hands, though gnarled with age and hard labor, were quick and precise, finding vital points, twisting limbs, silencing screams before they could fully erupt. The very air seemed to crackle with the raw, untamed power he wielded. Clara, still held captive, watched with a terrifying fascination. The man she had ridiculed as a mangy dog was revealing himself to be a formidable, almost mythological figure. Every taunt, every dismissive glance she had ever cast his way, returned to her now with crushing weight. Her world, built on superficial judgments, was being utterly dismantled by the sheer, undeniable competence of this silent man. She saw the fear in Miller's eye, a raw, naked terror she had never expected to witness in such a brutal man. The remaining bandits, witnessing the decimation of their ranks, began to break, their discipline dissolving into panic. Then, with a final desperate roar, Scar Miller lunged at Elias, a bowie knife glinting wickedly in his hand. He was a man cornered, driven by a primal need to survive, to reclaim his lost dominance. But Elias was ready. He met Miller's charge with an unyielding stillness, his eyes fixed on the bandit leader's movements. In a blur of motion, he sidestepped Miller's wild swing, the knife slicing harmlessly through the air. Elias's hand shot out, not to strike, but to disarm with terrifying efficiency. A twist, a wrench, and Miller's cry of pain was cut short as his own knife clattered to the ground. His arm twisted at an unnatural angle. The confrontation was swift and brutal, ending not with a lingering struggle, but with a decisive, chilling finality. Miller, disarmed and disoriented, found himself at the mercy of the man he had underestimated. There was no need for a drawn-out struggle. The outcome was inevitable. Elias moved with a purpose that transcended mere anger, a cold, hard justice born of experience. He rendered the bandit leader utterly helpless, silencing his threats, breaking his spirit. The last echoes of the gang's terror faded into the silence that followed, a stillness profound and absolute. As the dust settled, the square of Aguas Claras lay in an eerie quietude. The air, still heavy with the scent of fear and smoke, was now tinged with the metallic tang of something else. Elias stood unblemished, his buckskins unmarked, his gaze sweeping over the scene with an almost clinical assessment. Around him, the remnants of Miller's gang lay still, a stark testament to his efficiency. His movements were slow now, deliberate, as he calmly wiped the blade of his own hunting knife, a simple, well-maintained tool that had served him well. Clara, released from her captor's grip in the chaos, stumbled forward, her fine garments soiled and torn, her carefully constructed facade utterly shattered. Her entire body trembled, not just from the cold, but from the profound shock and a dawning comprehension. Her eyes, filled with a torrent of raw, unbidden tears, met the unyielding gaze of the mountain man. In that moment, all her arrogance, her cultivated disdain evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming wave of shame and a gratitude so profound it was almost painful. She saw not the mangy dog she had scorned, but a silent, formidable protector, a guardian forged in the crucible of the wild. She realized, with a clarity that seared her soul, that true civilization was not merely a matter of silk and silver, of refined manners and grand houses. It was built and preserved by the very grit, courage, and raw strength of men like Elias, the men who truly understood the brutal realities of a world beyond polished facades. He was the silent, unacknowledged bulwark against the savagery she had so blithely ignored, the true strength that held the delicate fabric of their lives together. Elias, his task seemingly complete, began to gather his belongings, moving with the same quiet purpose as when he first descended from the peaks. He cast no triumphant glance, no demanding look. He simply gathered his pack, his focus already turning back to the solitude of his mountain home. The silence that had followed his swift justice now stretched, filled only with the ragged breaths of the shaken townspeople and the chilling realization of their own helplessness. The most lethal man in town, the one they had mocked, had saved them all, and now he simply prepared to leave. The aftermath of the confrontation settled over Aguas Claras like a heavy shroud. The silence was profound, broken only by the whimpering of a child, the distant mournful cry of a coyote, and the ragged breaths of the townspeople, who slowly began to emerge from their hiding places. The scene was stark. The bodies of Scar Miller's gang lay scattered across the square, stark reminders of the brutal efficiency of the mountain man's justice. Elias, his task complete, remained impassive, his gaze distant, as if already mentally ascending the silent peaks he called home. He had not sought adulation or gratitude. His actions were born of a deeper, unspoken code. Clara van der Hoven, still trembling, stumbled towards him. Her elaborate gown was torn, her hair disheveled, but her eyes, though red-rimmed and swollen, held a clarity she had never possessed before. The veneer of her old self had been stripped away, revealing a raw vulnerability. She reached out, a tentative hand hovering near his arm, then drew back, unsure of her right to touch him. Words, grand and eloquent, usually came easily to her, but now, faced with this silent, formidable man, they failed her. There was only a profound, overwhelming sense of shame and a gratitude that choked her throat. The townspeople, slowly regaining their senses, also stirred. They looked at Elias, no longer with disdain, but with a dawning awe, a respect born of terror and salvation. Whispers began to circulate, hushed and reverent, speaking of a legend of a protector they had unknowingly harbored. The sheriff, still nursing a bruised jaw, approached with a new deference, offering thanks, offering compensation. Elias, however, merely shook his head, his refusal firm and unspoken. His price was not measured in gold. As the moon began its slow ascent, casting long, eerie shadows, Elias moved towards the well. He drew water, rinsing the blade of his knife, a ritualistic act of cleansing. Clara, finding a fragile courage, followed him. She had to speak, had to acknowledge, to somehow bridge the chasm of her past cruelty. She began haltingly, her voice barely a whisper, confessing her disdain, her ignorance, her arrogant mockery. She confessed her shame, her fear, and finally, her profound gratitude. She was no longer the proud heiress but a humbled woman, stripped bare of her illusions. Elias listened, his face a stoic mask. When she finished, he simply nodded, his eyes, deep and ancient, meeting hers. There was no anger in their depths, only a quiet understanding, a recognition of the shared humanity that violence often exposes. He spoke then, his voice a low rumble, not of accusation, but of a wisdom born from a lifetime of solitude and survival. He spoke of the mountain's harsh lessons, of how true strength was not found in wealth or social standing, but in resilience, in purpose, in the willingness to face the raw edges of existence. He spoke of how the wilderness stripped away pretense, revealing the true nature of a person, good or ill. He then quietly shared a glimpse into his own past, not as a boast, but as a stark truth. He spoke of a time before the mountains, of a war fought not for glory, but for survival, where men learned to kill with cold precision, to move like shadows, to exist on the knife edge of life and death. He spoke of losing comrades, of carrying burdens that never truly lightened, of finding solace only in the vast, indifferent embrace of the wilderness. He had chosen the mountains not out of weakness, but as a sanctuary from a world that had demanded too much, a place where he could simply exist, unjudged. His words were few, but they were heavy with the weight of experience, the quiet agony of a soul that had seen too much. Clara, listening, felt a profound shift within her. His trauma mirrored her own sense of abandonment, her own isolation within her gilded cage. She had been left to fend for herself in a world that valued her only for her name and fortune. He had been left to carry the scars of a war no one truly understood. In that shared vulnerability, a fragile bridge formed between them. They were both, in their own ways, outcasts, survivors of different kinds of battles, each bearing wounds the world preferred to ignore. As the conversation drew to a close, a palpable understanding settled between them. It was not a romantic spark, but something deeper, more elemental, a mutual respect, a silent acknowledgement of shared humanity and strength. Elias, having offered his rare glimpse into his past, simply turned. His business in Aguas Claras was done. He had saved them, not for them, but for the principle of it, for the quiet code he lived by. He had protected the innocent, punished the cruel. And now the mountains called him back, their silent peaks a promise of peace. But as he prepared to leave, a new, unsettling detail emerged. One of the town elders, a man who had been a silent witness to Elias's swift justice, approached him with a wary glint in his eye. He pointed to a small, intricate symbol carved into the hilt of Miller's fallen knife, a symbol that was not common to these lands, but one known to Elias. It was a mark of a specific, brutal militia from the distant territories, a group known for their ruthlessness and for their relentless pursuit of those who crossed them. This particular symbol signified a deeper, more organized threat, suggesting that Miller's gang was not merely a band of opportunists, but perhaps a vanguard, or at the very least, connected to a larger, more sinister force that sought to extend its reach. Elias's gaze hardened, a flicker of something beyond weariness entering his ancient eyes. The calm was an illusion, the peace fragile. The mountains might offer sanctuary, but the shadow of human evil, it seemed, stretched even to the highest peaks, promising that his solitude and perhaps the town's safety might soon be disturbed once more. The morning after the terror, a strange calm settled over Aguas Claras. The townspeople, still reeling from the events, moved with a newfound quietness, their faces etched with a profound experience. The bodies of Miller's men had been removed, the blood washed from the dust, yet the memory of the night's violence lingered, a chilling reminder of their vulnerability. The sheriff and his deputies, humbled and shaken, began the slow process of restoring order. But the true architect of their salvation had already turned his gaze back to the wild. Elias, true to his nature, had refused any reward, any acknowledgement beyond a silent nod. He gathered his pack, his eyes already distant, focused on the peaks that beckoned him home. He moved with the quiet grace of a creature returning to its natural habitat, a silent promise of his own solitude. Clara, however, found herself unable to let him simply disappear back into the wilderness. The night had changed her, shattering the brittle shell of her arrogance, revealing a strength she hadn't known she possessed, and a profound respect for the man she had so deeply misjudged. She followed him to the edge of town, her once scornful voice now soft, respectful. She offered him not money, but a plea for understanding, an admission of her own brokenness. She spoke of the empty grandness of her life, of the isolation that came with her wealth, of the fear that had always simmered beneath her haughty exterior. She saw in his weary eyes a reflection of her own unspoken burdens. He was a pariah of the wilderness, she of society, both adrift in their own ways. And in that shared vulnerability, a silent understanding began to bloom between them. Elias listened, his gaze steady. He saw not the rich heiress, but the frightened woman whose spirit had been tested and found resilient. He offered no grand words, but a quiet acknowledgement of her transformation. He spoke of the mountains, not as a place of escape, but as a crucible, a place where one confronted their truest self. He spoke of the harsh beauty, the unforgiving lessons, and the profound peace that could only be found in facing the raw elements of existence. His voice, a low rumble, seemed to carry the ancient wisdom of the very land he inhabited. He did not invite her to follow, nor did she presume to ask. Their parting was not a severance but a quiet recognition of a deep, unforeseen connection. Elias disappeared into the forest, leaving Aguas Claras to pick up its pieces. Clara returned to her mansion, but she was no longer the same woman. The elegant dresses still hung in her closet, the fine china still graced her table, but her heart had been irrevocably altered. She began to oversee the reconstruction of the general store, not as an obligation, but as a commitment to the community that Elias had protected. She initiated aid for the families affected by the raid, transforming her vast fortune into a force for good, a quiet homage to the man who had taught her the true meaning of strength and worth. Over the next few months, a fragile peace settled over Aguas Claras, nurtured by Clara's quiet efforts. But the memory of the militia symbol, carved into Miller's knife, continued to gnaw at Elias. His solitude in the mountains, though restorative, was now tinged with a subtle vigilance. He watched the passes with a keener eye, listened to the winds with a more attuned ear. He knew, with the primal certainty of a seasoned warrior, that such organizations rarely acted in isolation. Miller's attack felt like a probe, a test, rather than a definitive strike. One cold, windswept afternoon, as Elias was checking his traps high in a secluded valley, he came across something unexpected. Tucked beneath a loose stone near an ancient, barely visible trail, a trail he knew to be part of a network used only by a few and never for casual travel, he found a small, weathered leather pouch. Inside, among a few dried herbs and a smooth river stone, was a tarnished silver locket. He recognized the intricate engraving on its surface, a stylized mountain flower unique to the region. He recognized it because he had seen it before, long ago, in the hands of a young woman he had known in his youth, a woman from the valley below, who had often spoken of dreams of the high peaks, a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Clara van der Hoven. The discovery sent a jolt through him. The flower, he knew, was also the almost forgotten crest of the van der Hoven family, a symbol they had abandoned for more elaborate, civilized designs generations ago. The locket was old, unmistakably a family heirloom, yet it was found on a hidden mountain path far from civilization, left as if a message, a silent plea. The coincidence was too profound, too specific to ignore. This was not merely a forgotten trinket. It suggested a deeper, more ancient connection between the woman he had saved and the wild mountains he guarded. The flower on the locket whispered of old blood, of a shared ancestry with the very land. It suggested that Clara's lineage, far from being purely urban, had roots that delved deep into the same rugged soil that had forged him. The locket felt like a silent conversation across generations, a reminder that all paths eventually led back to the wild. But before Elias could fully unravel the implications of this discovery, a new, more immediate threat made itself known. A lone rider, a young man from a remote homestead, stumbled into Elias's hidden valley, his horse lathered and gasping, the man himself pale with exhaustion and terror. His words tumbled out, breathless and frantic. He spoke of new riders, a larger group than Miller's, scouting the passes, their movements deliberate, their intent unmistakably hostile. They were asking questions, he said, looking for a woman of means, a rich heiress who had recently caused trouble. They were not just bandits. They were soldiers, well-equipped, merciless. Their targets, Aguas Claras, and specifically Clara van der Hoven, whose reputation, it seemed, had now reached even the darkest corners of the frontier. The locket in his hand now seemed a potent symbol, not just of a forgotten past, but of a dangerous, entwined future. The fragile peace was shattered. The mountains, it seemed, would demand more of their silent guardian. The young rider's breathless words, delivered amidst the desolate beauty of the high mountain pass, shattered the fragile calm Elias had found. The locket, clutched in his weathered hand, now felt less like a relic of curiosity and more like a heavy burden of foreboding. The militia, a larger, more organized force, was indeed on the move, searching for Clara van der Hoven, targeting Aguas Claras. This was no mere bandit raid. It was a calculated escalation, a hunt with sinister intent. Elias knew, with the chilling certainty of experience, that such men would leave nothing but desolation in their wake. His solitude, once a sanctuary, now felt like a lonely vigil. He had chosen the mountains for peace, for respite from the cruelties of the world below. But the world, it seemed, had a way of reaching even the highest peaks. He thought of Clara, her initial arrogance, her profound transformation. She was no longer merely a wealthy woman. She was a symbol, a catalyst, and now a direct target. The thought of her falling into the hands of these merciless men stirred something deep within him, a protective instinct he had thought long buried with the ghosts of his past. Elias moved with a renewed sense of urgency. the young rider trailing behind him, guided by the mountain man's silent, determined strides. They descended the perilous trails with a speed that defied the treacherous terrain, making for Aguas Claras. The stakes were higher now, the enemy more formidable. This was not about personal vengeance, but about the defense of a community, of a life he had, however reluctantly, touched. The memory of the militia symbol on Miller's knife, once a cryptic warning, now burned with chilling clarity. These were not men to be reasoned with, only to be outmaneuvered, outfought. As they neared the town, the signs of the approaching threat became undeniable. Scout parties, disciplined and stealthy, were already probing the outer defenses, their movements betraying a military precision that chilled the blood. The air carried the faint, acrid scent of campfire smoke from hidden bivouacs, and the distant glint of metal spoke of rifles and sabers. Aguas Claras, still recovering from the previous raid, was about to face a far graver test. Elias arrived in town under the cloak of twilight, a silent specter, his presence a stark contrast to the growing panic. He went directly to Clara, finding her in her mansion, not in despair, but overseeing preparations, her face pale but resolute. The news of the approaching militia had spread like wildfire, and the townspeople, though terrified, looked to her for guidance. She had begun to organize what little defense they could muster, a testament to her newfound strength and leadership. Elias laid out the grim truth, his words terse and direct. He spoke of the militia's numbers, their tactics, their ruthlessness. He explained the meaning of the symbol on Miller's knife, revealing the deeper, more organized threat they faced. Clara listened, her gaze unwavering, her initial fear hardening into grim determination. She understood the gravity of the situation, the almost insurmountable odds against them. Together they devised a desperate plan. Elias, with his profound knowledge of the surrounding terrain, identified key choke points, natural defenses that could be fortified. Clara, using her wealth and her new influence, mobilized the town. Men, women, and even older children worked tirelessly through the night, barricading streets, digging shallow trenches, preparing what few firearms they possessed. The very air hummed with a desperate, unified purpose. The elegant homes, once symbols of indulgence, became bastions of defense. As the first faint streaks of dawn appeared on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood and fire, the militia's main force revealed itself. They emerged from the passes, a formidable column, their uniforms dark against the snow-dusted mountains, their intent clear. A messenger, bearing a white flag but carrying a chilling ultimatum, rode forward. He demanded Clara van der Hoven's surrender, stating that her family's wealth was to be confiscated as restitution for her alleged crimes against a powerful, unnamed entity. The message made it clear. Resistance would mean total annihilation. The town laid to waste, every soul put to the sword. The townspeople wavered, their hard-won resolve threatening to crumble under the weight of such an overwhelming threat. Clara herself felt the cold hand of despair. To resist meant certain death for all of them. To surrender meant her own personal doom and the plunder of her family's legacy. She looked at Elias, his face a granite mask of unwavering determination. He had sworn no allegiance, made no promises, yet he stood beside her, a silent bulwark against the tide. Then Clara made her choice. It was a decision born not of fear, but of an unexpected fierce protectiveness for the community she had once scorned. She would not allow Aguas Claras to be destroyed, nor its people to suffer for her sake. She stepped forward, her voice clear and strong despite the tremor in her hands. She would go with them, she declared to the militia's messenger, on one condition, that her town, her people, be spared. Her sacrifice would buy them time, buy them peace. Elias watched, his jaw tight, a flicker of profound respect in his ancient eyes. She had become something more than an heiress. She had become a true leader, willing to face the wolves at the gate. As the militia's messenger returned with her answer, the weight of her decision hung heavy in the pre-dawn air, a silent promise of a sacrifice that might save them all, or simply lead her to her own grim end. The battle for Aguas Claras, and for Clara's very soul was about to begin. The chilling ultimatum hung in the crisp morning air, a tangible weight on the hearts of the townspeople. Clara van der Hoven, her voice ringing with a newfound resolve, had declared her sacrifice, offering herself to the wolves to spare her flock. Elias watched, his face a stoic mask, but his mind raced, calculating, assessing. He knew the militia's promise of clemency was a hollow lie. They would take Clara, plunder the town, and then likely burn it to the ground. His ancient warrior's heart rebelled against such a predictable, cruel outcome. As the militia's messenger rode back to their lines, a tense silence descended upon Aguas Claras. Elias moved then, not with a flourish, but with the quiet authority of a general on the battlefield. He spoke to Clara, his words low and urgent, outlining a desperate gambit. Her surrender would not be real. It would be a feint, a calculated distraction to draw the enemy into a trap. He would use the terrain, the very environment they despised, against them. He appealed to the townspeople, their faces a mixture of fear and dawning hope, reminding them of the true strength that lay within unity and their knowledge of their own land. The militia, confident in their numbers and their prey's perceived submission, began their advance. They formed a column, their horses trotting, their banners unfurling in the cold mountain breeze, their dark uniforms a grim spectacle against the pale light of dawn. Clara, escorted by 2 grim-faced militiamen, was led out to meet their commander, her head held high, a beacon of defiance in the face of overwhelming force. The town, outwardly quiescent, was in fact a coiled spring, ready to release its pent-up fury. As Clara was brought before the militia commander, a man whose polished uniform and cruel smile spoke of ruthless ambition, Elias melted into the shadows. He had already positioned his few, trusted allies, hardy frontiersmen, and even a few of the humbled townspeople he had quietly trained, in strategic locations. Each held a single precious rifle, their aim true, their hearts filled with a desperate courage. The confrontation began with Clara. The commander, scoffing at her terms, revealed his true intent, not just her person, but the complete despoilment of Aguas Claras. He spoke of the unruly wilderness needing to be tamed, of examples needing to be made. It was then, as his arrogance reached its peak, that Elias gave his silent signal. A single shot cracked through the cold air, striking the commander's horse, sending the animal rearing and throwing its rider to the ground. It was not a fatal shot, but a disruption, a catalyst. Chaos erupted. The militia, disoriented by the unexpected attack from unseen assailants, fell into disarray. Elias, a phantom amidst the confusion, struck. He did not engage in direct combat, but targeted their leadership, their communications, their morale. His actions were surgical, designed to break their cohesion, to turn their disciplined advance into a panicked retreat. From the rooftops and hidden nooks, the townspeople, emboldened by Elias's lead, unleashed their own desperate defense, not with overwhelming force, but with cunning. Barricades, seemingly innocent, collapsed to impede their movements. Hidden tripwires brought horses and riders crashing down. A volley of well-aimed stones and a few precious bullets from the frontiersmen added to the militia's confusion. The militia, accustomed to fighting organized armies or terrified civilians, found themselves battling the very essence of the wilderness, a foe that struck from everywhere and nowhere. As the battle raged, Clara, seizing the opportunity, struggled against her captors. Her earlier vulnerability had been a pretense, a shield. Now, with a ferocity born of desperation, she fought, twisting, kicking, using her intelligence to momentarily disorient her guards. Elias, seeing her opportunity, moved like lightning. With a swift, brutal efficiency, he neutralized her captors, freeing her to join the fray, her eyes blazing with a defiant fire. The turning point came when Elias, utilizing his knowledge of the mountains, led a small group of townspeople to trigger a controlled rock slide on the pass through which the militia had entered. The thunderous roar of falling rock, dust, and snow created an impassable barrier, cutting off their retreat and their reinforcements. The militia was trapped, demoralized, and now outmatched by a foe they couldn't see, fighting on ground they didn't understand. The commander, furious and wounded, tried to rally his men, but his authority was shattered. Elias, emerging from the dust and chaos, confronted him directly. It was not a duel of brute strength, but of strategy and will. The commander, relying on his brute force and arrogance, was outsmarted at every turn. Elias used the commander's own aggression against him, disarming him with a move so swift it was almost invisible, then pinning him not with a killing blow, but with a disabling, humiliating precision. The commander, defeated and broken, lay helpless, his grand ambitions reduced to dust. As the remaining militia scattered, fleeing into the impassable terrain or surrendering in despair, Elias stood amidst the chaos, the quiet victor. The town had been saved, not by brute strength alone, but by a combination of his cunning, Clara's courage, and the desperate unity of the townspeople. Yet, even in victory, a shadow lingered. A small group of militiamen, led by a particularly brutal lieutenant, managed to escape the trap, vanishing into the higher, more treacherous passes. They were wounded, perhaps, but not broken, carrying with them the bitter taste of defeat and the promise of a vengeful return. The immediate threat was vanquished, but the wilderness, Elias knew, held many secrets, and not all of them were benevolent. The peace was fragile, and the mountains, ever watchful, still held unspoken dangers. 9 months later, the brutal scars of the militia's raid had largely faded from Aguas Claras, replaced by the vibrant hum of a town reborn. The general store, rebuilt stronger and larger, bustled with activity. The homes, once barricaded, now welcomed the sun with open windows. The spirit of the town, forged in the crucible of fear and defiance, was stronger, more resilient. The townspeople, no longer complacent, had learned the value of vigilance and the profound strength of unity. And at the heart of this rebirth, a new kind of sanctuary had taken root. High in the mountains, nestled in a secluded valley where the pine scent mingled with the crisp, clean air, Elias's solitary cabin had transformed. It was no longer merely a place of survival, but a home, warm and welcoming, its stone hearth the focal point of a newfound domesticity. The rough-hewn timbers still stood, but now they sheltered a life rich with companionship, a profound peace earned through shared trials. Clara van der Hoven, the elegant heiress, was no longer defined by her wealth or her lineage. She had shed the last remnants of her past arrogance, embracing a life woven from simpler, more profound threads. Her hands, once accustomed to silk and lace, now expertly tended a small garden of herbs, stitched warm garments and stirred hearty stews over the crackling fire. Her laughter, once sharp and dismissive, now rang with a genuine warmth, a sound that brought a rare, soft smile to Elias's grizzled face. She carried herself with a quiet grace, her spirit radiant with purpose and contentment. And she carried more than just purpose. Her form, round with new life, was a living testament to the complete healing they had both found in this wild, unforgiving land. The child she bore was a symbol of their unexpected union, a bridge between two disparate worlds, the wild freedom of the mountains and the resilient heart of a woman who had dared to embrace it. Elias, the solitary mountain man, was no longer alone. His days were still filled with the familiar rhythms of the hunt, of tending traps and observing the silent sentinels of the forest. But now he returned to a home brimming with warmth, with the gentle murmur of a woman's voice, and the unspoken promise of a future echoing with the cries of a child. He who had always found solace in solitude now found a deeper, more profound peace in this shared existence, a peace that healed the ancient wounds of his past. The locket, with its stylized mountain flower, now rested not in Elias's pocket, but around Clara's neck. Its tarnished silver gleamed against her skin, a tangible link to a past that now had a new meaning. Through diligent research and the unearthed diaries of her great-grandmother, Clara discovered the true, forgotten history of her family. The van der Hovens, generations ago, had been amongst the first to settle these mountains, not as prospectors for silver, but as hardy pioneers. learning the ways of the land from the indigenous tribes and, it was hinted, from a line of fierce, solitary guardians of the passes, a lineage that included Elias's own people. The mountain flower, a forgotten crest, was a symbol of their shared roots, a testament to a destiny entwined long before they had ever met. Her family's wealth, built on silver, had in fact been secured by the very land and the protectors she had once scorned. The grand mansion in Aguas Claras, it seemed, had always been connected to the humble cabin in the high valley, two branches of the same ancient tree. This final revelation wove a deeper, more mystical layer into their story. It was not merely coincidence that brought them together, but the silent hand of destiny, a thread connecting their ancestors to the very soil they now defended. Their union, then, was not merely one of love, but of fate, a weaving together of two pariahs into the very fabric of the land itself. The sun dipped below the rugged peaks, casting long, purple shadows across their valley. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, its warmth a beacon against the growing chill. Elias sat by the hearth, carving a small wooden bird for the child soon to arrive, his hands moving with a tenderness once reserved for the most delicate of traps. Clara, resting, watched him, a peaceful smile gracing her lips. The journey had been arduous, fraught with peril and the brutal unveiling of truths, but it had led them to this moment, to this profound, undeniable happiness. For in the wild heart of the mountains, they had not merely survived, they had thrived. They had built a home, not from bricks and mortar, but from courage, sacrifice, and an enduring love that defied all expectations. Their story was a testament to the enduring truth that true strength is not found in the absence of fear, but in facing it, in protecting those you cherish. That family is not merely blood, but those who stand with you, those for whom you fight. And that a home is not a place, but a feeling of belonging, a sanctuary built within the heart, capable of flourishing even in the most isolated and unforgiving corners of the world. It was a silent legend, whispered by the wind through the pines, a timeless tale of redemption, resilience, and the enduring power of found love in the vast, untamed wilderness. Did you enjoy this journey? Tell us from what corner of the world you're watching this story from. Leave your comment, and to make sure you don't miss the next adventure, subscribe to the channel.